what some of our challenges are in the watershed in terms of water quality impacts. And then I'll talk about our program. So what have we been doing in terms of citizen monitoring? It'll be analogous to a lot of other programs throughout the state, but I always like hearing about what other folks are doing. I'll talk just a teeny bit about some of the data that we've pulled out. We've been doing this a long time, so there's a lot of data, so I only threw a couple slides in there. And then I really wanted to finish out the day kind of taking a broader perspective. So, you know, I've worked with various groups throughout the state, and I've learned a lot trying to get this program up and running for the last few years. And then I'm hoping actually that we have time to have a discussion and that people are up for having a discussion, because I'm still learning, and there's a lot of folks on the phone here that I can learn from. So I'm hoping that we can really have a discussion at the end. Okay, so who's the Truckee River Watershed Council? That's the organization that I belong, or that I'm a staff member of, and we are a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to protect and restore the Truckee River. And we do that. We do our very best to take a very science-based approach towards restoration. So a lot of that science has to do with monitoring data and using monitoring data appropriately. We work in partnership with other entities a lot, and so we're really kind of a broad-based stakeholder group working in our part of the world. This is our part of the world. If you have a big enough screen, this will come out pretty well. But if you see the inset on the upper part of the photo or the map there, that's where we are. We're kind of right at the crook of California, just north of Lake Tahoe. The Truckee River is the only outflow from Lake Tahoe. So our river comes out of Lake Tahoe, flows through a portion of California, heading north in the east, and then the Truckee River terminates in Pyramid Lake. So our river terminates in Pyramid Lake in Nevada, and actually on the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe reservation. So it's a complicated watershed. Our little portion of it is highlighted in pink. We call it the Middle Truckee River. It's effectively the portion of the river and all the land that drains to it in the California portion of the Truckee River, or of the Truckee River. So that's our geography. Zooming in a little more, that's our part of the world here. These are kind of some of the challenges that we face in our watershed. People just driving through here, coming up here, going skiing, going fishing, whatever. They look around. It's beautiful. It looks nice. It looks pristine. But the reality is that we have been subjected to 150-plus years of pretty intensive land use in our part of the world. So the Truckee River has somebody's saying that their slides are still on the cover slide. Mine's moving forward. So is anybody else having that problem? Sorry, that seemed like an important thing to correct. Oh, we have somebody else stuck on the cover slide. Eric, any ideas?
None, because I'm on your slide as well.
Oh, shoot. Okay, somebody said it's working. Maybe try to refresh or something?
I have no suggestions.
Okay, so about half the people are saying they're okay, and the other half are not okay. For those of you who aren't following along, maybe try to join in a different web browser? I don't know. I have no idea how this works. So I apologize. So I'm showing, I'll try to talk, I'll try to narrate as though some of you are not seeing the slides.
We will be posting the web recording as well as a PDF download of all the slides.
Yeah, it makes it a little boring right now, but great. Okay, so I'm zooming in on a slide of our watershed of the Middle Truckee River. So it's the outflow of Lake Tahoe to the California-Nevada state line. And the map shows a series of what we've established as watershed priorities. And this is I don't want to go into this map too much, but basically it's a combination of risk and value. So some areas are orange. That means kind of high risk, but that's because they're in okay shape. They're in pretty good shape, but we really need to keep protecting them. For example, a lot of the red areas are areas that are really in bad shape. So these are a lot of the sites along the main stem of the Truckee River. And the impacts that we see in our watershed, we have a lot of dams in our watershed. We have several reservoirs that are controlled by dams, and so that really affects river flows. 6 water bodies, including the Truckee River itself, are listed as polluted for primarily sediment, although Donner Lake has all sorts of interesting listings as well. The interstate railroad parallels the Truckee River for much of its length. The interstate 80 parallels the Truckee River for a lot of its length. We've experienced pretty intensive periods of logging here. We're mostly suffering from the impacts of logging that took place early in the 1900s, not so much modern practices, but we are still clearly experiencing impacts from, improperly located skid roads, railroads that were developed to get logs out, and just complete clear cutting of the watershed. We've also had gravel mining, and then there's grazing impacts as well. So, it looks nice and beautiful up here, but, as everywhere in the state, we have our set of challenges before us in terms of protecting water quality and improving water quality. I need to use the arrows. Okay. So specific concerns that are unique, a lot of those things I just listed are not unique to the Truckee River, but a couple weird, unique things about our watershed that we're contending with. One is this thing called the Truckee River Operating Agreement. Shorthand is TRWC, and this is it's a series of water. It's how water moves around the Truckee River system. So it's how the dams and reservoirs are operated. And this is a negotiation that's been underway for 20-plus years, and it was just went into effect approximately a year ago. So we're in year 1 of TRWC operations, although we've been planning for it for 20 years. So in this first year, we've seen some drastic changes to how releases are being managed out of the dams. And we have several of our streams below dams are very productive trout fisheries, so it's directly impacting the health of our watershed. So there's a lot of opportunity. I'll talk about it a little bit, mention it again. There's a lot of opportunities under the Truckee River Operating Agreement, and we're trying to kind of get ahead of that versus just sort of reacting to the negative impacts. As I mentioned, the Truckee River itself is listed as impaired for sediment, so that's something that we focus on a lot is the TMDL that has been developed for the Truckee River. And a lot of our restoration work is aimed towards attaining the TMDL or achieving the pollution control goals outlined in that document. We have a lot of urbanization. There was a very rapid period of urbanization in certain areas of our watershed starting really in the mid-1900s. Things went, or mid-1990s, sorry, like a whole century different. But the economic collapse kind of was helpful in that respect in terms of it slowed things down, and we're kind of able to regroup a little bit collectively in the watershed and plan out some of this urbanization a little bit better. But it is a pressure. I mean, this is a very desirable vacation area, so there's a desire to build vacation homes. And it's a big part of our economy, so it is something that we just need to work with and manage. And then also to dirt roads. We have our watershed is littered with dirt roads, so management of those really affects sedimentation into our water bodies. Okay, so as I mentioned, these are kind of the problems that I'm going to say this cursor isn't working, so I'm going to what's the focus of our monitoring program? Well, we're interested in addressing impairment in the watershed. So, as I said, excess sediment is a concern. This is a kind of typical, runoff situation. That photo is just, dirt just running down a roadway there. So a lot of our efforts, specifically our bioassessment program, has really been focused on sediment, and a lot of our restoration work has been focused on sediment. We have started boosting how much we're monitoring nutrients. It's still not a very comprehensive program, but the data we're collecting I'm becoming concerned that we have nutrient issues in our watershed as well. So that's becoming a little more of a focus in our monitoring program. Okay, so the history of our monitoring program, The bioassessment group started in 1999. It actually started just as a group of concerned individuals in the watershed. It wasn't even part of the Watershed Council yet. And the bioassessment group started really specifically in response to a pipeline spill that happened and really damaged one of our creeks in the watershed, pretty much wiped out every bug that was living in this stream. So local folks started talking to the Department of Fish and Game at the time, now Fish and Wildlife, and got the idea to start a citizens monitoring group focused on bioassessment. So that program's been going strong since 1999. And then we have what we call our ambient monitoring program, and that's focusing on your more typical water quality parameters such as temperature, pH. I'll go into some details. That started as part of a watershed-wide monitoring event. It's called a snapshot day. I know other major watersheds do snapshot days as well. The idea is to get a whole bunch of people out monitoring one day a year and get data for the entire watershed. So in our case, that was all of Lake Tahoe, the entire reach of the Truckee River, and on down to Pyramid Lake. So it's kind of a cool event, and it's been going since 2000. We started working with that group in 2001. And so that's just been kind of neat to have that long-term data record for such a wide geography. So that used to be it. What we would do for ambient monitoring was just one day a year. And, of course, you know, we always want to do more, so we expanded that program, the ambient monitoring program, in 2007. Okay, so where are we today? Our bioassessment is still continuing. We only sample from about 5 streams annually, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, just depending on kind of what our focus is for that year. And then our ambient water quality, we've expanded to about 20 sites that we regularly monitor, a handful of sites that get kind of sporadically monitored, and we do that 4 times a year. We collect the real basic measurements: temperature, pH, electrical conductivity, dissolved oxygen, and turbidity. And then we used to just do nutrient samples looking at nitrogen and phosphorus 1 time a year. We've now expanded that to try to do that twice a year. Okay, so I just have, like I said, I just have a couple of data slides on what we've learned because, you know, we have a lot of data, so that's not of great interest. But so from our bioassessment, we have been using, there's an index of biological integrity for the Eastern Sierra, Nevada, it's been developed, you know, for our part of the world, and it works pretty well for our data. We aren't currently using, for those of you who kind of know bug data, the California Stream Condition Index, the CSDI, which is kind of the new emerging tool. And we'll switch over to that once it's kind of a little easier to do. Right now it's super easy to crunch the IBI, so we've been using that. And from the streams that we monitored, this little pie chart is a little hard to read, but the green are sites that we've monitored over the years that are fully supporting of beneficial uses. So those are the tiers in our IBI. The yellow are partially supporting, so some degradation observed, but kind of hanging in there. And then the red streams are sites that are not supporting beneficial uses. So they're highly degraded, and those are sites, a lot of those red sites that I'm showing in this pie chart, again, very simplified data here, are sites that we've targeted for some restoration actions, saying, look, we know we have a problem. And so the bioassessment data, I really like working with it a lot. I'm a biologist by training, so there's a slight bias there. But I like the bioassessment data because it's kind of a rich thing to look at. I'm showing you IBI data, which most people really like because it's a single number. You know, it's like good, bad, ugly, right? So you get 1 score for your entire stream. But I like diving into the metrics and saying, okay, so specifically what kind of impairment are we seeing here? Does this seem to be a sediment impairment issue, or is this maybe more of a nutrients impairment issue? And you can tease that apart from the types of insects that you're finding in your sample. So I think bioassessment is a really powerful tool. I'm probably preaching to somewhat of the converted here, but it's a really good tool for volunteer groups because it's easy to collect the data. You do have to pay somebody to do the lab analysis, but you know, the lab costs they're expensive, but my nutrient costs are crazy expensive too. And I feel like the data I get back from my lab output is it's very rich, and it's very kind of interesting to look at to me. Like I said, I'm biased. So then I said nutrients. So I don't want to go through like millions of graphs of temperature and pH and dissolved oxygen because that's not super interesting. But one of the things that our volunteer group specifically has been able to start working on is the question of nutrient enrichment. So Lake Tahoe, which is our source water, is listed as impaired for excess nitrogen and phosphorus. That's partially because the levels of nitrogen and phosphorus need to be extremely low in Lake Tahoe for it to maintain its clarity. So it's very much a concern in Lake Tahoe. In the middle Truckee River watershed, we only have a handful of streams that have established standards in our basin plan, so the Lahontan Basin Plan. So it gives us an indication of what's kind of too much of any nutrient in our watershed. Nobody's regularly monitoring nutrients in our part of the world. These streams that have standards, nobody's tasked with checking to see if they're meeting these standards. So we've been monitoring these sites over the last 15 years or so, and what we're finding is it's not like completely alarming, but we're seeing that these sites are exceeding their standards quite frequently. So we're not saying that our data are the basis for something like a 303B listing, but our data are definitely an indication. They're a screening tool to say, look, we need to start studying this a little more, and we need to try to get at why we're seeing these excessive nutrients. So the graph I threw up here was just for the handful of streams that we have standards for, and then the number of times that we've monitored those streams that it's exceeded the standard. And then in parentheses after the site code is how many times we've monitored that. So, you know, this first site, Boca OO, that's Little Truckee River below Boca Dam. We've only monitored it twice, but it's never exceeded the standard. So to me, that's important data. You know, if you have an N of 1, you have an N of 1. So where some of these other streams like Bear Creek, we've looked at that 13 times, and it's only exceeded the total nitrogen standard 2 times. There's other standards that's exceeded many more times than that. So for me, it's, you know, for this Trout Creek, okay, well, so we've monitored it 6 times and it's exceeded the standard 6 times. Okay, so let's start looking at that. That seems like a problem to me. So anyway, and then if we look across our watershed, not just at these ones that have standards, but we look at what these water quality standards are and compare other streams to them, it's like, wow, well, okay, a lot of streams have relatively high nutrients. Okay, so just that's, there's a lot more about our monitoring program, but I just want to talk a little bit about, you know, kind of where we're at right now and what we're thinking of expanding into, because there's a lot of things you can monitor. So for us, we're going to move into trying to get a handle on deposited sediment. So as I said, the Truckee River is listed for excess sediment. However, the standard is a suspended sediment standard, and we did some work we contracted out a pretty detailed study, and with Dave Herbst of UC Santa Barbara, who does a lot of bioassessment, and he came up with this pretty tight relationship between deposited sediment and biological impacts. And the work is really great. It's elegant. We have those papers posted on our website. But really what it came out to is that we're probably measuring the wrong thing. Our TMDL is probably not really set up to actually track the biological impacts that we're seeing in our watershed, because really what we need to get a handle on is how bad is this deposited sediment. And so this little picture I have on the screen here is this funny little PVC frame. That's 20 by 20 centimeters. And just a little grid on it. And so they figured out this rapid assessment technique where you just plop the frame down along a transect at every, 5 meters or, whatever your established sampling unit is. And you just, at each of the crosses, intersections on this grid, do you have fine sediment there or not? And it gives you a percentage of that quadrat that's covered by fine sediment. It's an index. And he set this up specifically so we could repeat his methods with volunteers. It's very straightforward. very easy to do. And so the idea is for us to get out and get a more in-depth categorization of how bad is this deposited sediment problem. I mean, so if you only have a few spots that has really, really high percentage cover by deposited sediment, well, that's fine, right? The bugs have plenty of other places to live. But if it turns out that the deposited sediment is prevalent in the Truckee River, well, then, okay, we've got some problems here. So his data indicated that actually deposited sediment was prevalent, so we just want to bolster that data set. And interestingly, we were able to use these data in the most recent review of the 303D listings for the Truckee River. So we want to, that's definitely an area that we want to expand into. And then I mentioned that TROA thing, the Truckee River Operating Agreement, that's really changed how releases are managed in our watershed. And so we want to bolster our monitoring around that. We do have some data for sites below dams, and so we just really want to track how the flows, the kind of flow regimes are either positively or negatively affecting the biological condition of these streams. So that's going to be an area of focus of us coming up. Okay, so that's kind of all I had specifically about the Truckee River Watershed Program. I have a couple slides on just things I've learned, kind of musings. None of this, for those of you who have worked setting up a volunteer monitoring program, probably none of these are earth-shattering revelations, but just kind of things to think about as you're, either setting up your program or revisiting your program and thinking about where you want to expand or contract your efforts. And then, like I said, I'm kind of hoping that we can wrap up after I get through these last few slides. It'd be great to have a discussion because, as you'll see, there's places we need help for sure. So really the main point, I think, every time somebody says, hey, I want to start a volunteer monitoring program, it's like, well, that's great. That's fantastic. But what's the purpose of your program? And there's no right purpose or wrong purpose, but you just need to be really clear on what you're trying to do. And that will dictate what you monitor, where you monitor, how often you monitor. That will really start helping you define all these nuts and bolts characteristics. So you might design your program around a specific pollutant. So when our program started, it was kind of really a lot around sediment, but we're expanding as we're finding that we have to worry about other pollutants. But you may, like a lot of groups in the foothills are dealing with mercury left over from gold mining. So you may really just want to be monitoring for mercury. So, so that's great, but, be clear that that's what you're doing. A lot of people generally are worried about land use, so that's a very common thing to design a program around. That can be, there's challenges, but it will affect, where you choose to sample. And then some programs are purely educational, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Education is kind of by default a component of any citizen science program. That's the point. But if you have a purely educational program, you're really going to set up things a little bit differently. Then, so you have your purpose. So then drilling down, the next is like, what are your very specific questions? And those questions can change over time. They can be refined over time. But you really want to make sure you're answering the questions, right? So, if you're really interested and your question is, what's the pollutant load in first flush stormwater runoff from the roads, well, you better make sure that you're storm sampling and you're not just going out there in the middle of July and collecting a sample then. I mean, that's a very obvious example, but just designing your program around your questions. And then seasonality, are you monitoring at the right time of year? So, for our watershed, we don't monitor in the winter. There's kind of obvious problems with that, especially this year, where everything's under 6 feet of snow. But there's also just, to be honest, not a ton going on just on your average winter day. But again, if we were going to focus on stormwater, I need people out there every time it rains up here and we get runoff, in the middle of the winter. So just thinking about that, and then, we've been monitoring nutrients just the way the funding has worked. We've been monitoring for nutrients at high flows, but we've realized I've always said, we need to start getting some low flow concentrations as well. So just something to think about. you know, a lot of groups like to say, oh, we go out every month and monitor. That's great. That's one kind of question you're answering. That's one kind of data, and that's awesome. But, you know, just be clear if you're getting your timing right. Again, something we've struggled with. Okay. And then another thing is, so how do you get your data out, right? So there's kind of two, I think about data use in two ways. There's kind of like us reporting to the state and our data getting used by the state. So how do you ensure that that happens? Well, you know, obviously collect your data using some kind of protocol, and I'm sure, you know, everybody who's part of a volunteer group who's on the phone right now, you're tapped into the state board and SWAMP because you're here, so you know that there's standard operating procedures for bioassessment collections. There's established techniques for collecting grab samples that are just very standard, and so you know, if there's a protocol out there and you can follow it, that's obviously the best. It also makes it easier if you do have to fill out a quality assurance project plan, like if you have funding from the state, then you can just reference a published procedure, so that's really great. Oh, Eric's putting QAPP up there. So your chat box is covering up my presentation. I'm going to move you. And then also reporting your data to the state. So that is something that we struggle with. That's something every single volunteer group I've talked to struggles with. In our case, we're interested in our data. A very specific thing is getting our data evaluated and incorporated into this regional board's integrated report, right? So that's they do, now they're on a 6-year cycle for each region, and that's where they evaluate existing 303D listings, new proposed 303D listings, et cetera. And so, you know, we have a good data set. It's robust, it's high quality, and it can be really helpful and informative. And now the state and regional boards, they will not use any data unless it's is available through CDN. There's some exceptions for non-SWAMP compatible data, but, you know, just your average, like, for example, our nutrient data, you know, for that to even be looked at for the integrated report, I have to make sure it's in CDN. It also does provide people with some confidence in your data. So, you know, if somebody's like, oh, hey, I hear you have some dissolved oxygen data from Extreme, you know, sure, I can email them an Excel spreadsheet, or I can say, hey, you can go into CDN and you can download the data yourself. And it's like, wow, okay, that gives it like a layer of it passed somebody's muster in order to get into that database. So it just makes you look a little more professional. Most people aren't going to fight their way through CDN to get your data, but if they are, then that helps. So, and then there's just the plain nuts and bolts of it. If you do have a state grant, which is supporting any of your monitoring work, well, guess what? You have to put your data in CDN. So. And then the final thing is that's kind of like us to decision makers, but really we're a citizen group, right? So we want to talk to citizens, both the people who are doing our monitoring, and then also just our the general public here. And so this is the part of our communications where we just, I'm going to say we've failed. I mean, we're terrible at this. And so we're trying to internally come up with some ideas for how we could better get our data out. You know, right now I go through the bother of doing an annual monitoring report. I think exactly 3 people look at it each year. It's posted on our website. So it's kind of an exercise in I don't know what. And then, you know, a lot of times I am providing data locally. So anytime there's, like in our watershed, anytime there's a development proposal, I get a bunch of requests for the water quality data pertaining to what might be there. So that's just one example. You know, other people are you know, like Trout Unlimited has been interested in some of our data on the streams that they care about for trout fisheries, et cetera. So there are other ways that we've gotten our data out, but we would like to have a better communication plan because, you know, we're spending a lot of time and energy doing this, and we're doing good work, and just kind of getting it out there. So some groups I think are a lot better at this than we are. So anyway, if anybody has any suggestions about that, I would love to talk about that. So I think with that, here's who I am. Here's how to get a hold of me if you have any questions or suggestions or commiserations. That would be lovely. And I think we have time if anybody wants to ask any questions. There's some of you probably know what the California Water Quality Monitoring Council is. It's a council filled with appointed members, and there's a spot for citizens monitoring, citizen science, and I currently fill that role. A lot of what we talk about at the Monitoring Council is data, getting data out and data visualization. And if you haven't gone to the My Water Quality portals, they're pretty cool. I mean, some of them are in better shape than others, so that's where we try to get data back out to the public. So most of these portals pull from things like CDN, and then you can do kind of more user-friendly queries to try to understand what might be going on about water quality issues in your area or statewide. And so there's portals on safe to swim, safe to eat shellfish, ecosystem health. There's a lot of really cool stuff there. So I kind of play the role of the citizens. Usually I'm like, but it's hard to get our data into CDN is a lot of what I say. But anyway, but it's fun. It's neat to look at these things on a statewide analysis. But I would encourage you to go check out some of the resources that are available through this portal. So do you limit nutrient sampling because of analysis cost? Absolutely. So in our standards up here for nutrients are stupidly low. We're dealing with micrograms per liter, not milligrams per liter. So that means that we have to send our samples to labs that can get to those detection limits. So if your detection limits aren't as are higher, then nutrient samples can be much more affordable. But for us to run a full sample of all forms of nitrogen and phosphorus is a little bit over $100 a sample, which it doesn't sound like that much, but if you have 20 sites you're trying to do 4 times a year, we're just not going to be there for a while. Okay, and then Katie, okay, do you recommend any specific guidance documents that explore how insect type relates to sediment versus nutrient disturbance? Wow, so there isn't really any specific guidance. That's what's tricky about it. It's kind of like knowing your own watershed, knowing entomologists, and talking to people who actually study these bugs. I wish there was something out there that was a little more specific. I mean, right now, really kind of what's available for a bioassessment practitioner is it's a lot of, you're just going off tolerance values, and so that doesn't really tell you much, So if your insect has a tolerance value of 8, which means it's really tolerant of pollution, well, what kind of pollution? So, yeah, I talk to a lot of bug nerds. That's not a great answer, but if anybody knows of any document like that, please throw it out there on the public chat. Everybody would love to see that. Okay, so Karen, what is your process of entering data post-field work with my program? I have no problem recruiting field volunteers, but these volunteers, okay, I'm not sure exactly. Not interested. Got it. Okay. Yeah, we enter the data ourselves. We actually split it up into 2 parts, and one person enters the data, and then I QA the data. So it's time consuming, but I've tried to have volunteers enter in the early years of our program. We did have volunteers try to enter the data, and I pretty much had to delete the files and start all over again. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's that hard. But it was. There were too many errors. So if you have the right volunteer and they're a single person, kind of, has the right, constitution for this and is willing to do it, I would say if you could have a single volunteer who's interested in doing it, you could probably make it work. But it does need to be pretty tightly supervised. When we started off the group, we were doing a lot of the analysis, the bioassessment analysis in-house here. We've gotten to the point where we send out most of our samples. It is honestly just a time constraint. So we do process one of our collections a year in-house here. The volunteers, we use that entirely as a screening tool, but it actually works really well. So the volunteers just identify it to the family level. So if any of you have been through Jim Harrington's College of Bioassessment. That's kind of the level he teaches to in the, I don't know, is that class number 3 or something. But there's actually a great book that Jim produced several years ago now, and it gets you down to the family level. So I can't throw those data into, say, our Eastern Sierra IBI, for example, the analysis of the index of biological integrity that we're using right now. But you can get a really good picture of, is the stream in good condition, is the stream in bad condition, and do we need to do follow-up sampling? So we'll do kind of a smattering of just kind of, I don't even know what to call it, but not focused collections. So we'll be like, hey, this stream in our watershed has never been sampled. So we'll grab a sample from one of those streams, and then that might be one of the ones we look at in-house, and we say, oh, great, the bugs look great. Awesome. Sounds good. But if we get the sample back and we say, whoa, this does not look good, then we'll do follow-up sampling, and we'll send those data out to the lab so we can have them in a comparable analysis. Interestingly enough, I was at a training with Jim Harrington maybe 2 years ago now, a year or two ago now, and they had developed a California Stream Condition Index with family-level data, and it worked pretty well. So I was like, yeah, let's get that out there. So, I mean, that would just be better for everyone because it's a lot cheaper to pay a taxonomist to go to family than it is to pay him to go to species. So anyway, but for now we just use it really as a screening tool. And it's hugely educational. I set up microscopes in our conference room, a couple nights a month, and it's probably not the most efficient way to really get the data done, but the people love it, and it gets them super engaged in learning about the streams and the insects. And that's actually back to the question of how do you know what bugs do what. I learn a lot from my volunteers because they're it's at least 50% people who are fly fishers, and they know a lot about how these bugs behave, so that's kind of cool just to learn a little more from my volunteers as well. Did you share the? Yeah, so I got the question, can you share the California Stream Index that uses family? I can't. It was proprietary, and Jim Harrington would not give it to me, so bug Jim Harrington at California Department of Fish and Wildlife.